In the last lesson, we built our first class, which was class dog, that represented a programmatic expression of a dog. A dog that has attributes or fields, methods, things the dog can do, and a constructor. And we touched on a few topics briefly. One was visibility, the other were properties and a constructor. And this is the first more in-depth video to talk about some of these members and protocols that you will use. So in our dog class, and I have the code from the first video here, we defined fields, but we didn't use them. We did create a method that did something. We created a constructor, which we'll talk about later, to set the initial value on fields. But attributes of a class can be written or can be read through properties and are stored through fields. As I said in the first video, fields, they're a fancy name for class level variables. So in our dog class here, a dog can have a height and a weight, those are both integers, and a breed. Fields should only be accessed by members inside of the class. So let's create a new method called display information. And display information on a dog will write the height, weight, and breed to the screen. It will read values from the fields or the class level variables and display those on the screen. So here we will write console.writeLine height equals height in inches weight is weight in inches, and breed is breed in inches. Now let's say we wanted to add another field. It's very easy. One thing we omitted was the name of the dog here, so string name. So here again we're declaring another class level variable, a field, and then we can convey the name through console.writeLine. And we'll talk about name in a minute. And sorry, breed does not have units and weight is pounds. So here we've created a method called display information that will show the height, weight, breed, and name of the dog. And we noticed in the constructor we declared defaults for height, weight, and breed. But we're not going to declare a default for name because name is not something that really can be defaulted to. There's not a default name for a dog, for instance. So here, just like before, instead of barking, let's go back to our main method. And we have Buster as an instance of dog here, and let's call display information. So if we run this application, it's not going to do what I wanted it to do because I didn't use proper string interpolation. So let's do it right this time and rerun the application. And here we see he's 24 inches in height, 50 pounds, a mutt, and has no name because these are all default values on the fields of the class. So let's say we wanted to write our own custom values into these fields. After we create an instance of the class, there is a way for us to do that, and that is, they're called properties. Properties allow you to get or set values onto fields of a class. There are two parts to a property, a getter and a setter. If you're familiar with JavaScript or jQuery in JavaScript, getters and setters are very important. A getter allows you to get a value of a field, and a setter allows you to set a value to the field. So let's create properties that allow us to get and set values to our fields here. How do you build a property? Well, let's go back to our class, and you see here we've broken it down, and let me move this over here into fields, methods, and constructors. We're going to create another part of our class called properties. And properties will expose our fields to be used outside of the code within the class. So here we're going to create a property called height. We see the field itself is an integer, so then the property will be an integer. Int height. And to create a property, what we do is we open bracket and close a bracket. And we have a getter or setter that we create in here. So here we will create a getter. Use the word get, an open bracket and close bracket. And a getter is basically, you can think of it as a little method. We're going to call return, and here the height. So what have we done here? We created and exposed, and I'm going to throw public in here because again we haven't talked about visibility. We created a public property that if you call height, you can get the height. So for instance, if we do a variable equals dog.height, or in this instance a Buster instance.height, it will return the height that is stored in fields. A setter is the reverse. You're trying to set a value to height. So the setter syntax is set, open and close squiggly bracket, and here we want to set the value to height. And the key word we're going to use here is value. So height equals value. So what happens is when you run a setter, the value that is being set to the property is exposed through the value keyword, and then you can use that to set a field's value. So in this case, height will equal value. Value could be anything. It could be 5, it could be 15, but it will be an integer. So we can create properties for all 4 of these fields, so let's do that. Now you'll notice I called one height with a lowercase h and one height with a capital H. The typical way to expose properties is using a capital letter to start. The typical way to express a field name is a lowercase letter. And you'll notice the difference because properties, again, are exposed outside of the class and fields are used inside of the class. And typically they have the exact same name. So if you have a field named height, your property will be height. But the only difference between the two names will be a capital or lowercase letter. So let's then create getters and setters, so properties for each of the other fields. So weight, we can do the same way. Weight is just the same format. Return the weight on the getter, and in the setter, set the weight to be the value. And then the same thing with the breed and the name. So here, a public property, breed, return breed for the getter, otherwise set the breed value in the setter. And also the difference here is the type. So the type of your property must match the type of your field. So if your field name is string, your corresponding property should be a string. If your field name is an integer, the corresponding property should be an integer. And then finally, we'll create a property for name. We'll walk through the syntax one more time before we use it. This will be name. We will return the name, or we will set the name. All right, again, so the property format, the visibility level, in this case, public. Again, we will have a video on visibility. The type of the property, the name of the property, which should correspond to the name of the field. So height should match height, but again, the property should have a capital H and the field should have a lowercase h. The getter starts with the keyword get, an open squiggly bracket. You're returning something, and again, you'll see how this works when we use the property. You use the keyword return and then the field value. The setter, which is the height, so the field equals the value being passed into the property. The difference between height and weight and breed and name are the types. So again, height and weight are integers. Breed and name are strings. So we've declared these properties. So let's go back to our main method. And in our main method, again, we've created an instance of the dog class called Buster. And when we go to display information, all it shows is the default values of the constructor. The height of 24, the weight of 50, the breed of mutt, and the name, which is a blank string because we haven't set it. So we can then use properties to set the field values. So here, Buster.height equals 18. Buster.weight equals 75. Buster.name equals Buster. And since the default value is mutt for breed and Buster is a mutt, we don't have to set that information. So now, when we call display information, it will show the property or the field values exposed to the properties. Now, let's look at this real quick. So in here, we talked about getters and setters. We are using setters here. So when we say Buster.height equals 18, this 18 is being passed into the setter of the height property. If we go down to our properties, 18 is passed to the setter through the keyword value. So here we are saying height equals 18. When we call this, that means that 18 is being sent to the field height. So now, after we call these three setter properties and we run display information, because we have set the property of height to 18, the field of height is now set to 18. And when display information goes to access height, 18 is written to the screen. And again, the same can be said for the weight and the name. When 75 is set to the property weight, 75 is then passed to the field weight, and then the display information method grabs the value of the field weight and displays it to the screen. That will display 75. The name Buster, we have a string property called name. We pass in the string Buster to the setter of the property. That then in turn sets the field name to the value Buster, and then the display information method uses the field name and displays Buster on the screen. So let's run this application. And we see when we set the properties, they're now set to the fields and they're conveyed on the screen here. Now we can do the same thing for Ernie. And all we have to do is create a new dog object. Dog Ernie equals new dog. And maybe his height, weight, and name and breed are different. So here, we can take that code, paste it down here, and replace Buster with Ernie. Ernie is 14 inches in height. He weighs 80 pounds, and his name is Ernie. And he's also a mutt, so we won't change that value. And instead of calling just Buster.displayInformation, we'll call Ernie 2. So what have we done here? We have two dogs. We created an instance of dog called Buster and an instance of dog called Ernie. In each of these, we've set properties, and on each of these instances, we've called the display information method. Now, I had mentioned static variables in class and in the video, how static variables are shared across instances of classes. These fields and these properties are instance members, meaning if I set the height for Ernie, it will not affect Buster. If I set the name of Buster, it will not affect the name of Ernie, because both of these are different instances of the dog class. So if I run this, you'll see two different sets of values, one for Buster and one for Ernie. Now, what I've used here are property setters. We've set the property to a value, and that is then conveyed down to the field. If I want to use getters, there's a different way. So instead of calling display information, we here have set some values. Let's write them to the screens ourselves. So here I can do a console.writeLine. Buster weighs pounds. So using string interpolation, I'm going to access the getter. And you don't have to use string interpolation to access a getter. You can use it using a normal statement, but here I can say Buster.weight. Now Buster.weight is available to me, and what I'm doing here is when I call Buster.weight, it's going down here to weight, and because I'm not setting a value, I'm getting a value. A return statement is called returning weight. So down here we've defined the field weight. This is passed to the getter, which is then passed to our statement. So this is replaced with 18, because up here, 75, because up here we set the weight to 75 pounds. So when we run this and show it on the screen, we see Buster weighs 75 pounds. We used the getter for the property weight to display the field value of weight for the Buster class instance to the screen. We can just as easily change this to Ernie is blank inches in height by going Ernie dot height. Now we're using the getter for height on the Ernie instance of the dog class. So here we're saying Ernie is Ernie.height, inches in height, which we'll call the getter for height, which will return the field value of the Ernie instance of the dog class. So let's run this application. Ernie is 14 inches in height, and this corresponds to us writing or setting the height property of the Ernie instance of the dog class to 14. So those are the basic usages of fields and properties in getters and setters on properties. Again, you want to make sure properties are used outside of the class and fields are used inside of the class. So again, if we go back to the class and we go to the display information method, in the display information method, we have accessed the fields, the local variables, to the class. But outside of the class, when you're accessing an instance, you access the properties. That's the typical approach to programming classes using fields and properties. Properties are on the outside, fields are on the inside. Now, you can access properties inside of a class, and you can access fields outside of the class, but it's bad practice and you shouldn't really do it. So again, properties on the outside, fields on the inside, and getters and setters link those two together.